أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم والصلاة والسلام على سيدنا محمد وعلى آله وصحبه أجمعين. Inshallah, this will be the last session on Waswasa. We are reading from the 21st word. 5 cures for the 5 of the heart's wounds. Inshallah, this will be the last one. Aspect. In matters of belief, what occurs to one in the form of doubt are waswasa. The unhappy man suffering from waswasa sometimes confuses conceptions in his mind with imaginings. That is, he imagines a doubt that has occurred to his imagination to be a doubt that has entered his mind, and supposes that his beliefs have been damaged. Sometimes he supposes a doubt that he has imagined to have harmed his belief. Sometimes he supposes a doubt he has imagined to have been confirmed by his reason. Sometimes he supposes pondering over a matter related to unbelief to be unbelief. That is, he supposes to be contrary to belief is exercising his ability to reflect while trying to understand the causes of misguidance, and his ability to study and reason in impartial fashion. Then, taking fright at these suppositions, which result from the whisperings of Shaitan, he exclaims, "Alas, my heart is corrupted and my beliefs spoiled." Since those states are mostly involuntary and he cannot put them to rights through his faculty of will, he falls into despair. The cure for this wound is as follows. Just as imagining unbelief is not unbelief, neither is erroneously surmising unbelief. And just as imagining misguidance is not misguidance, so too, reflecting on misguidance is not misguidance. For both imagining and surmising and supposing and reflecting are different from confirmation with the reason and submission of the heart. They are other than them. They are free to an extent. They do not listen to the faculty of will. They are not included among the obligations of religion. But affirmation and submission are not like that. They are dependent on a measuring. And just as imagining, surmising, supposing, and reflecting are not affirmation and submission, they cannot be said to be doubt or hesitation. But if they are repeated unnecessarily and become established, then a sort of real doubt may be born of them. Also continually taking the part of the opposing side and calling it unbiased reasoning, or being fair, reaches the point where the person involuntarily favors the opposing side. His advocacy of the truth, which is incumbent on him, is spoiled. He too falls into danger. A state of mind becomes fixed in his head, whereby he becomes an officious representative of Shaitan or the enemy. This is the first part of the inshallah Waswasa we will study today. Or Najam, do you think like we should read all the way into the end, or shall we can talk this part?
It's been a few weeks since we looked at this, so I think that we should go a bit more piece by piece rather than reading too much.
Mm-hmm.
But it's up to you.
So in this fifth aspect, I see like imagining, surmising, reflecting, and supposing unbelief, right? These 4 states in this first paragraph, we can first talk about them. And I believe, like, when I realized that, when I first came to United States, I suffered from that, like, and I didn't know much about this part too. Alhamdulillah, and it's very beneficial, inshallah, for all of us. In this first paragraph, inshallah, I can read again, then we can talk about it. The fifth aspect, in matters of belief, what occurs to one in the form of doubts are waswasa. The unhappy man suffering from waswasa sometimes confuses conceptions in his mind with imaginings. That is, he imagines a doubt that has occurred to his imagination to be a doubt that has entered his mind, and supposes that his beliefs have been damaged. Sometimes he supposes a doubt he has imagined to have harmed his belief. Sometimes he supposes a doubt that he has imagined to have been confirmed by his reason. And sometimes he supposes pondering over a matter related to unbelief to be unbelief. That is, he supposes to be contrary to belief, he's exercising his ability to reflect while trying to understand the causes of misguidance, and his ability to reason and his ability to study and reason in impartial fashion. Then, taking fright at these suppositions, which result from the whisperings of Shaitan, he exclaims, "My heart is corrupted and my beliefs spoiled." Since those states are mostly involuntary, and he cannot put them to rights through his faculty of will, he falls into despair. Well, I believe that we can talk about this paragraph now, inshallah. Any comments on this?
Bismillah. I think we have to make definitional demarcations between the words which are used here. For example, imagination, there is supposition, reflection, pondering, all of these things. I think they have to be unpacked, really, so that we can know exactly what Ustad is saying here. For example, he says that doubts occurring to our imagination, we can imagine them sometimes that they have entered our mind. What do we mean here by mind? Do we mean heart? Because heart is where we understand. And imagination, for me, khiyal and qalb are very, very different. A doubt that has entered your heart is much stronger and more difficult to uproot than something that you've just imagined. But sometimes we think that something that we've imagined really is in our hearts. And we suppose that because of this, our beliefs have been damaged. But imagining a doubt, if a doubt is at the level of imagination, then it's not in our mind, it's not in our heart, and it can't have damaged our belief. But if we dwell on it, he says, if we dwell on it later on, he says, it may actually become a thing, it may actually become something. And we can see here that if we pay too much attention to imagination, we start to think that it's actually taken root in our hearts, it's harming our belief, and sometimes we even imagine that reason is confirming that doubt. We see certain things which appear to corroborate it, which appear to affirm it, but they are again imagination. This happens a lot to people with waswasa. And we even imagine that, our ability to reflect and our ability to understand the causes of misguidance, we imagine that itself is wrong. That itself is a sign of unbelief. Our ability to study and reason impartially, we also believe that that is somehow wrong. And then, as it says here, we take fright. And of course, all of these are the whisperings of Shaitan. We also have to bear in mind that there is only really one source of all information that comes to us, and that is from Allah. But there are some of those things which Shaitan, through his exercise of free will, puts in our mind, and Allah allows this clearly. And that is for us, in order to be able to strengthen our faith, to finesse our faith, we have to realize that they are doubts and we have to repel them. We have to affirm the fact that they are doubts, or if they're imaginings, we have to affirm the fact that they are imaginings. Shaitan has put these before us to consider. He wants to trip us up. Allah, on the other hand, wants to strengthen us, and we are caught in the middle. Do we strengthen our faith by realizing that these things are from Shaitan, or do we somehow forget and we allow Shaitan to trick us? Someone suffering from Waswasa very easily falls into this trap of imagining that khiyalat, imagination, and things that are imagined are actually real doubts that have taken root in one's heart. It's a very dangerous disease.
Very dangerous, Yana. When you talked, I remembered that when we have that sickness and waswasa of shaitan, it kind of gives us hopelessness, right? It's as if we have no relation with God, no connection. And when you are hopeless, that's where shaitan wins, right?
Yes, absolutely. We have to try to recognize an imagination from a real doubt which has been affirmed by reason. There is a difference, but because we are not on guard, we are not vigilant, we are not on the lookout always for the poisoning that shaitan does to us, we are tricked often. And if we are not careful, if we are not on our guard, then we are very easily misled. Imagination is a very, very strong faculty. And if it's not seen for what it is, it can overpower us. And it can become a thing. They talk about self-fulfilling prophecy. If you imagine something and if you dwell on it and if you ponder it enough, it can actually become a thing. This has happened to me in the past on quite a few occasions. And I think it happens to most people. And the more that you are prone to waswasa, the more frequent these things will be, I think.
This is the most dangerous one. Right? In the previous weeks, we talked about waswasa on our actions, right? I mean, when you are, for example, taking wudu, when you're praying, but now this is in the matters of belief.
Yes.
The most serious one.
We need to realize also that shaitan never rests. Shaitan always tries to make capital out of us, out of our actions, out of our beliefs, out of the thoughts that he puts in our head. And of course, when you realize Allah is testing us all the time and shaitan is the means of our test, then a lot of this we can mitigate it, Shaitan has no power. We have to realize shaitan has zero power unless we allow him to control us. We can do that. We can give him this fictive power, this fictional power, by surrendering to him. And unfortunately, you either surrender to Allah or you surrender to nafs. And surrendering to nafs is actually surrendering to shaitan. They are two sides of the same coin. Shaitan on one side, nafs on the other.
Inshallah, I want to ask Salih Hocam too. Salih Hocam, your comments and maybe your experiences on this.
Assalamu alaikum. First of all, Colin Hocam basically has gone through all of the details very, very accurately. But I would say a few verses, which is nothing but an inferior confirmation of what Colin Hocam said. So at the core of this type of Waswasa is again ignorance of the one who is inflicted with Waswasa about what the inner faculties do, what they are. They sometimes even don't know about their existence. For example, it was, I guess, 4 weeks or 3 weeks ago, which I uh, contributed a little bit, and there we were talking about, I guess, Lume Shaitania. To me, it was eye-opening because I did not even know that a faculty like this actually was existing. But by just learning the inner faculties and what their purposes, their roles in all of this, calamity of Vesvasa, then things start to get unwind, and you try to, you can then position everything or locate everything in their should be positions. And the same story goes here as well. So imagination, mind, heart are different things. Supposition, surmising, or confirmation are different things, and without um, without gaining the ability of differentiating these um, uh, manevi actions, it is almost impossible to recover from this sickness. And fifth aspect is basically, I guess, going through this. Imagination is imagination. It is like an inner eye. To me, it isn't like an inner eye which shows you what you have in your head, and whatever you are having more time with. Say, for example, if you're an engineer, you would probably see things in your mind which is related to engineering. Or if you see some bad scenes, then these are going to be the dominating scenes that you see inside your head, and it often becomes a source of this problem. For example, I was in Middle East Technical University. This was kind of the castle of communism in the 70s, 80s, and brothers. When I was an undergrad student, we were having discussions about whether is it a- at all any does it have any value in trying to learn what the antithesis of Islam, which is communism in that case, says. But we were being warned about not doing this because reading the books uh, of readings book that are explaining batil is very likely to cause spoiling of the heart. And I started saying this, tasvir of batil to someone who is not, um, who is not immune to that, immune to these batil knowledge would spoil the heart. Uh, so, being exposed to meanings that are against iman or belief or tawheed or names of Allah or purity of Allah or Qudsiyat of Nubuwa. If someone is too much into reading, learning, or trying to dig further into those meanings, then it is probably going to cause meanings to float by in its imagination, and these are going to be confused by the untrained man, and he is going to think that these are vespas, these are doubts. However, this is just the imagination working against the man who's inflicted by Waswasa. So I guess it boils down to gaining the ability to discern what imagination is, what confirmation is, what reflection is. So I think this is the matter in a nutshell.
Thank you. Inshallah, we can ask Mustafa abi too. And from what you said, the ignorance. Inshallah, at the end we will also talk about that too. Yani the not knowing the difference between imagining, right, surmising, reflecting, supposing. These are not here. We said they are not voluntary, right? They are mostly involuntarily, and we cannot correct them through our faculty of will. They are like kind of free, and we are not responsible for them, for imagining. we can imagine something, we can, you know, reflect, ponder upon things. But sometimes like they are, we cannot control them through our faculty of will.
Yeah,
So
it is like, for example, our heart is beating out of our control, but it is something that we need. Or if you have a meal, then in the following 1 to 3 hours, your stomach and the muscles in your stomach is going to just function and do what they're supposed to do. The same thing applies to imagination. So if you feed your imagination, then it is going to do whatever it is required to digest what you have put in your imagination. And without knowing, you know, what muscles of your, you know, inner faculties are functioning at the moment that you're having that, you know, uncomfort, then you're in trouble. So one of the most important things here is that, I mean, of course, knowing what imagination is, what confirmation is, what submising is, but there's another thing which is equivalently or more important than that is, we have to be careful about what we are putting into our imagination. So what is the input? Then it's going to determine the output. So imagination is free in its own sphere as much the stomach is free in its own sphere as well, or the muscles in our heart. Yeah.
So it's very good that you touched upon that, you know, being busy with maybe wrong ideas, right, when you were studying sometimes, but sometimes we are exposed to these ideas and we listen to them and maybe we see them even involuntarily, but being busy with them, being busy with wrong ideas also, you know, leads to this waswasa. And I believe like that's why the method of Risale-i Nur is that, you know, when you start explaining something, even something like wrong, he doesn't go much deep, right? He doesn't explain the battle, your wrong ideas too much. He explains what's correct, and he cures our inner wounds in that way.
Yeah, that's a very, you know, important characteristics of Risale. So this is saving a lot of imans. Only this method is saving lots of iman, I guess. Thank you for pointing this out.
Mustafa Hocam, any comments?
Assalamu alaikum. I think the point you made it, Omar, also in the previous aspects, there were sections where it's related with the waswasa on ubudiyah, our actions. Those are things I think which keep our minds in some way. But this one is related to the affairs of the iman, the belief. I think it's the most critical one because it keeps our heart rather than our mind. Because if someone lose the iman, for example, believing in akhirah, that means, you know, he's losing the ticket to the eternal happiness. So this is maybe one of the most critical aspects of the waswasa. And when Ustad is explaining in the previous aspect, if the knowledge, I mean, if we know the reality of the waswasa and we have the, you know, affirmation, then this waswasa can go away. But if we don't know and keep our mind and heart busy, this gets bigger and bigger like a balloon. And finally, it can make it like a permanent damage in someone's life. So that was maybe one kind of a confirmation of what you said. Another side is when we are thinking, like imagining a concept which is not the real, and you keep it and modeling in your mind and designing, I think there are levels. Maybe in Ustad is explaining this one in Lamat. So if an idea comes to Dima, our cognitive system, so first maybe idea comes, you imagine, and you put some kind of like a dress on it, a model, a shape, and then it goes to, let's say, a thinking, reflection, and all the way it goes to, you know, tasdik and izan. So maybe the shaitan wants you to step from level 1 all the way to level 7 or 8, thinking that, you know, this is a confirmation, you are losing your iman, you know, your heart is broken, and, you know, you lost your iman. So this way, maybe he wants to take the mu'min's iman and changing and maybe making like very desperate situation. So this is just what comes to my mind. Thank you.
Thank you, Jazakallah. MashaAllah. It's very nice to, you know, listen to different explanations and experiences. Allah. Colin Hocam, any comments on what we talked?
No, as you said, it's nice to have different perspectives and, you know, different angles that people see these issues from. It helps us to see what others are thinking, and it helps our own thinking. So it's always useful.
And now, inshallah, in the second part, you know, we will go a little deeper. Inshallah, it's also kind of like an explanation.
Before we go there, just at the end of this section, it's talking about this tendency that people have when they are trying to, for example, play devil's advocate. You know, when we take the part of the opposing side and we try to call it unbiased reasoning or being fair. Well, it's not. It's just another side. It's an opposing side. It's very easy when we play devil's advocate to suddenly trick ourselves into believing that, you know, some of what we're saying is actually true. Again, we have to be very careful. I think the key word is vigilance, you know, is keeping a watch over ourselves. This muraqabah, this looking after ourselves and questioning ourselves has to be constant. Otherwise, it's very easy for the khiyalat just to run away, you know, and take us with them. And suddenly we are really confronted with doubt.
And also, I want to ask, you know, what you said, Colin. Here, like sometimes when we talk about, you know, the matters related to belief, like, you know, Allah, everything happening, you know, by the will of Allah, by the power of Allah. But now, you know, we have these, you know, naturalists and, you know, people who do, you know, commit shirk. And when we are talking about these things, you know, sometimes in our circles, there is, for example, like, I don't know, there's someone, like he's also like our brother, but he kind of plays like devil's advocate, right?
Yeah.
I don't know, have you come across? And then
A lot, yes, a lot.
Arguments. That's harmful, and is that harmful for him, like for people?
I think so. Playing devil's advocate is fine, but we have to realize, you know, what we're facing with, what we're faced with, and this comes back to really being grounded in our own belief. We have to argue from a position of strength, and that means grounding our belief in something that is sure and safe and tested. And if you're talking about Ustad Nursi's teachings, to be grounded in those teachings gives one a solid basis from which to inspect and scrutinize other beliefs. I think if our belief is quite shaky and we're not grounded, it's very easy to be pulled this way and that and not know where the truth lies. Many years ago, people used to say to me, why do you read books other than the Risalah? You should just only read the Risalah. Now, I never agreed with that, but I can see where people are coming from. What they are actually saying is, first, get yourself a sure grounding in belief, and then from that position, you can scrutinize other beliefs, other opinions, other schools of thought. And this is something now that I think is very important. You have to be grounded in belief, in you know, in the teachings of someone that you can trust. And then from that position, you can safely play devil's advocate, you can scrutinize and inspect other people's beliefs, and you are safe because you're grounded. But other than that, there are too many people out there and too many movements that want to spread doubt and uncertainty, and it's very dangerous, extremely dangerous.
Colin Hocam, you said that we have to be vigilant. And I think if the person who might be inflicted by waswasa in this way is very unlikely to end up being not vigilant, because I mean, if it is ending up having those waswasa, then it is an indirect proof that this guy lacks the you know, infrastructure that would make him vigilant. And in this case, I guess the best strategy would be to be just in contact, the continuous contact with brothers or sisters who are, you know, seriously studying Quran, Hadith, Risale, or practicing in taqwa. Because someone who is left alone is not left alone. He or
Yes.
she is left with shaitan. So until that person can stand on its own feet, it is better to stay in a safe sphere.
Yes.
But
Yes.
yeah, after that, when he or she develops the knowledge infrastructure, then he can or she can fight on his or her own against shaitan to some degree. Because we started saying, if you rely upon your ikhlas, then do this. I don't remember the exact context, but Ustad is not completely banning or um, uh, trying to refrain his students from such sort of journeys. If you rely upon your ikhlas, then you can try something on the margin. But usually, this is not something Ustad is recommending to his students.
Yeah, I think you're right. I think the whole idea, first of all, you mentioned about vigilance. Yes, someone with waswasa actually is hyper vigilant. You know, you can be too vigilant. And you know, people who have things such as health anxiety, they are hyper vigilant over their bodies, and you know, the slightest thing that happens, the tiniest thing that happens, oh, they think something is wrong, they have an illness, they have a disease, they go on Google, they find lots of misinformation, they are hyper vigilant. And again, because we are, you know, ahl al wasat, we are people of the wasat way, we have to be vigilant but not hyper vigilant.
Exactly.
And again, ifrat and tafrit, we have to avoid those. The second thing about having, I love this phrase of yours, the cognitive infrastructure or the knowledge infrastructure. That's a wonderful phrase, and I will borrow it, inshallah. Yes, if you don't have the knowledge infrastructure, and which I characterized as grounding, then yes, you are in danger. Sometimes people write to me on Facebook and other places and say, how can I argue against this or that? And I'm thinking, if you need to ask, you shouldn't be arguing. You know, they say, how can I argue against causality with unbelievers? And, you know, if you don't know the arguments, then you shouldn't really be arguing. And if you need to ask me to give you that weapon, you shouldn't be fighting. You know, you have to make your own weapons. I think you're absolutely right, Saleh, and we have to have a grounding before we can start to journey outside of that, you know, that domain and scrutinize other views and debate and discuss. And this is why, you know, I said when people were saying, oh, read only Risale, I think this is what they mean. I think they mean first get a grounding in Risale, and then after that, you will have what you beautifully called the knowledge infrastructure, and you'll be able to stand on your own 2 feet.
Yeah. And this is not our own reasoning. Ayat is saying this. Haq has a right, batil has gone. So the order of the verse, I don't remember the exact phrase, Koran Hocam or Ömer abi. Please, if you remember the ayah.
What I didn't catch what you said. What was the ayah?
جعل الحق
Right.
Can you say it again? You cut off.
وجاء الحق وزهق الباطل.
Yeah, exactly. So in Quran, not only the words word choices of Allah, but also the order in which the revelation has come, even word by word, matters a lot. So if we, the Muslims, the believers, study Haqq well enough, then any battle would be pretty easily dispelled. So studying what the truth is should precede studying what battle there is out there.
Absolutely.
Yeah, because another, I guess this is from Lemaat, safi batılı tasvir, safi zihinleri bulandırır. Or detailing the battle spoils clean minds. I don't know if this is a good translation, but there are many uh, phrases, sentences in Risale. Of course, there are lots of ayat on this. This is not our own reasoning. This is what Allah says. This is what the great scholars, extract from Quran and Hadith. This should be the way. And we should first study Haqq. Then because in Beyazıt Mosque, Ustad was listening to reciters of Quran. Then he says, a sound came to me. Do you remember that?
Yes,
Part?
the dispute with the devil. Yes.
Yeah. So such kind of a dispute is only possible if you have studied your lesson well. Because if you remember at the end of that Risale, Ustad is saying there has to be one single instrument that would nail down that glorious proof, which is Rasulullah, or the Quran being the saying of Allah, to us, which is as strong as all of those thousands of nails. Then only knowing this, one can get rid of the torturous attacks of the devil in this way. So Ustad has studied these well enough. Then only after that he was able to come up with a proof which says, if Quran would be saying of a man only if Rasulullah is such a man.
Yes.
Do you remember those?
Yes, I remember.
Yeah. And Ustad is putting a footnote where he's saying, I have added those explanations into this Risale, trembling, my hands trembling.
Yes.
Because Quran is also using such phrases and arguments against mushrikeen. Yeah, so only knowing Allah's style, Allah's way of arguing against mushrikeen, then he could come up with arguments to fight against this type of waswasa of shaitan. I don't know, maybe I spoke too much, but yeah, so that's what I think about this issue. Sorry.
Mashallah, this so beneficial, mashallah. In the second part too, yani, I believe there is like too much to say in the second part too. Yani sometimes when we are busy with battle ideas with the idea, we will now focus on that. The most serious of this sort of waswasa is this: the person suffering from it is something that is actually possible. It's something which is reasonably possible. It is something which is of itself possible. That is, if he sees something which is of itself possible, he imagines it to be reasonably possible and reasonably doubtful. Whereas one of the principles of theology, something which is of itself possible, knowledge, and does not contradict the demands of reason. Something which is of itself possible is not opposed to certain knowledge and does not contradict the demands of reason. For example, the Black Sea sinking into the earth at this moment is of itself possible, but we judge with that sea its place. And we know this without doubting it. And the possible thing which is actually possible causes us no doubt and does not damage our certainty. And for example, of itself, it is possible that the sun will not set today and that it will not rise tomorrow. But this possibility in no way damages our certainty. Possibility in no way damages our certainty. It will rise and gives rise to no doubt. Similarly, unfounded suspicions arising from possibilities of this sort about the setting of the life of this world and rising of the life of the hereafter, which are among the truths of belief, cause no harm to the certainty of belief. Furthermore, the well-known rule, a possibility that does not arise from any proof or evidence is of no importance, is one of the established principles of both the sciences of principles of religion and the principles of jurisprudence, fiqh. A possibility that does not arise from any proof or evidence is of no importance. This mashallah made it so clear, right?
Is he talking here about probability and possibility?
Yeah. Yeah, certain things are not possible, but seems probable to the mind. Is this what you mean, Colin Hocam?
No, I mean, some things are, I mean, there are some things which are possible. For example, it's possible for the sun not to rise tomorrow, but it's not probable.
Okay.
You know, if something happens, if something has never happened, then it's not very likely that it's going to happen. Of course, there is always a possibility for it to happen. It's not precluded, but it's unlikely. And I think we forget this, you know. Going back to this thing about health anxiety, if you have a headache, it's most likely just a headache. But if you have waswasa, then you immediately think that you must have brain cancer, you know. Now, it's possible that you have brain cancer, but it's very unlikely because of the statistics. And the waswasa will magnify the possibility until in your mind, it will be a probability. It's probable. And then the likelihood of that probability will increase with the waswasa. So you will be giving yourself a bigger headache and you are already imagining that you have got cancer and you start thinking about your funeral and you know what will happen after your death and your family. And suddenly, if you're not careful, if you're not vigilant, it spins out of control, and then shaitan will make you completely desperate. You know, and despair, as we know, is haram. It happens very easily, and a lot of people are quite severely incapacitated by this ailment, you know, by this disease. It's a severe psychological disease, you know, thinking that the possible is probable and, you know, almost inevitable in a sense.
Jazakallah, Abi, this packing this into two words, possibility and probability. I think I will buy this. Thank you, Abi.
Possibility and like, and this gives the example of, for example, again, talking about the rising of the sun, rising of the life of the hereafter in the last, you know, the last rising of the life of the hereafter, which are among the truths of belief.
So I guess this is again boiling down to ignorance about how things work. Because, for example, just following up your example, having a headache might actually be the reason of the headache might be due to cancer, period. It's possible, but if that person does not know the statistics about what percentage of people who are having headache also having cancer, then this person might, as you just mentioned, magnify this probability. But it is again, I guess, boils down to not knowing how things work out there in the nature or in humanity. Um, so in the very beginning of this treaty, as you started saying, ignorance invites Waswasa, knowledge dispels it. I think that there should be some phrase like this.
Yes.
Yeah, I'm just trying to connect the dots, but and I think that this could be put under that category as well. So you start as insisting on knowledge, knowledge, knowledge. You should know how things work. Giving or attributing an enormous amount of probability or likelihood to Black Sea being sunk is just nothing but ignorance. You should go and learn some geography, or you should learn some history, he says. I don't
Yeah,
know.
yeah, it's interesting. They say also if you hear the sound of hoofbeats, think horses. Don't think zebras, you know.
Mhm.
You hear something galloping outside your house, it's most likely to be a horse. It's very
Yeah.
unlikely to be a zebra. But the Waswasa mind, the mind that's afflicted with Waswasa, hears hoofbeats and says, zebras. It may be
Mm.
zebras, you know.
Although
So
he's not in Africa,
again,
right?
as you say, brother, it's ignorance, also lack of trust.
Hmm. Yeah. Interesting. Would you mind telling more about how this means having
Like,
not trust?
If we are, as we're going back to the example of, I have a headache, it must be brain cancer. You know, Allah gives you headache. You've had headaches lots and lots of times. Why do you suddenly think that he's going to give you something very different to what he's given you before?
Mm.
Why? Why do you think that? People who are scared of flying or scared of going on any kind of transport, they go on it maybe 100 times and nothing happens. And then the 101st time, they're still scared. They're still worried. But, 100 times Allah has taken you from A to B without any problem. Why don't you trust? Statistically, again, it's knowledge, but I think it's also trust. Because when we don't believe in accordance with the knowledge that we gain, that shows lack of trust.
Mm. Yeah, that's a good point, Ajahn.
I don't know what we do about that. I think we have to understand, that Allah is Rahim, and you only die once.
Mhm.
But people with waswasa, particularly with health anxiety, and actually in the treatise on illness, Ustad talks about this. The waswasa itself becomes a disease, a serious disease. It's very interesting.
And this takes me to the first verses of Baqarah, because Allah is saying, "Kitabun la rayba fi." It is a book in which there is nothing to suspect about. Um, so Ustad is saying that there are three agents that are teaching about Allah. One is Rasulullah alayhi salatu wasalam, the other is Quran, and the other is Kaina, the universe, which is the manifest Quran. And to me, one interpretation of these verses in the beginning of Baqarah, Kitabun la rayba fi, is looking to the third interpretation of who teaches us about Allah. So, Book of the Universe is a book in which there is nothing to be suspected about, because Allah has laid down some rules, some laws. Some of them we name as Newton's law or gravitational law, or I don't know, wave equation and things like that. The more science biased brothers and sisters would immediately, recall lots of names of laws. But Allah is in this verses also pointing out to the fact that He laid down some laws and He is going to execute those laws regardless until the end of time comes. So in that respect, so I'm trying to connect your interpretation of having this type of waswasa to not having trust on Allah to this verse, because Allah is kind of having a qasam, having yamin on that this universe is going to function according to the laws, and I'm not going to make exceptions to this, except for very rare cases. So this universe is a machine or a factory which is going to work as it is designed until the end of time comes, I guess. I don't know.
I think with the caveat, brother, that a machine is a very delicate word to use, because machine gives the idea of something which is self-running. So we have to disavow that notion. It's a system. It's a living system that Allah is in control of constantly, and because Allah is Hakim, then everything in that system will be orderly, will run orderly because He is Hakim.
Yeah, exactly. I know the problem about the watch clock metaphor. You're right. I never mean that.
No, I know that you didn't mean that, but others may it may for other people be a little bit misleading. I know that wasn't your intention.
Yeah, Allah is Fa'il Mukhtar. He is always, applying His irada, right? Allah is making the decisions all the time. It's not the universe is not functioning on its own. It is not a clock that is set to run until a certain time. But Allah is always making that system function the way it is supposed to.
Yeah.
Okay.
You also, we talked about fearing death. This is the waswasa of shaitan. He is tiny different. I'm reading from the chat section. I think there is a positive aspect of the related faculty of like similar, I guess, faculty of our hearts. Our Prophet Muhammad والسلام, advises us to remember death often, and his companions anhum, used to fear greatly from the Qiyamah. However, these fears are a sign of Iman, and they enhance the level of Iman. And inshallah, I guess the last question is maybe related to it. Inshallah, I can read that. And then, if you ask purpose in waswasa visited on us with an affliction for believers, the answer, in condition they do not lead us or overwhelm a person, essentially waswasa are the cause of vigilance, lead to seeking the best way, and give rise to seriousness. They indifference and repulse carelessness. Therefore, in this realm of examination and arena of competition, the absolutely wise one put them in the hand of Shaitan, the whip of encouragement for us. He strikes it at our hand. If it hurts excessively, one must complain to the all-wise and compassionate and say, أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم. I seek refuge with Allah from Shaitan the accursed. And Salab, I guess, like you, are the cause of vigilance.
If you, I could not hear you because my internet is not good here. Sorry, I can't hear you now.
Just a banish indifference and repulsiveness. Yani mashallah, and we see even like the benefit of Waswasa, right, Colin Hocam?
Yeah, I mean, it's there for a reason. Going back to the interference, I think if we're not speaking, we should turn off our mics, because that, I think, makes it worse. Yeah, I mean, Waswasa is there for a point. There is a point, you know, doubt is there. I think we talked about doubt as well. Doubt has to be affirmed, but it also then, depending on what the doubt is about, it has to be rejected. It's there to make us think, but it's not there to make us anxious. And unfortunately, if we become anxious about it, it means we're not being vigilant. We're not using our, as Saleh so beautifully put, our knowledge infrastructure, and we're not trusting. So it's all about, you know, gaining knowledge, gaining trust, and using what we have positively and for the sake of strengthening our iman. It is the place of test and trial, and Waswasa is one of the instruments of test. Allahu Alam.
So I don't know if Harun Pirim abi is here, but he would probably comment on this like this. You know, in the control systems, this is for the brothers and sisters or towards engineering. Negative feedback is more important. Positive feedback is bad. You would always want to have negative feedback, because negative feedback is a measure about how far you are from perfection. And this is applied in this case as well. Ustad is saying this as well. So this type of instrument, which is Waswasa, is banishing indifference, repulse, carelessness, and it pushes us further into, you know, being more investigative believers. So these are all due to negative feedback. If we had received always positive feedback, then we would be probably a favor, another favor, Firaun. So negative feedback is good for improvement.
Yani in this subject, but the matters of belief, and you know, try to strengthen our belief. But sometimes Allah allows shaitan to give waswasa, and you feel that you still have a lot of things to learn, right, to experience.
Yeah, so as Colin Hocam said, if we are receiving those waswasa and ending up being anxious, then we are not vigilant, which means that we are far from being closer to perfection. I mean, at the moment that you are, you know, you build your knowledge infrastructure, then those waswasa would still visit you, but you will not end up being anxious, or you will not become, you will not have psychological problems because of this type of waswasa. You would just fight against it, and you would probably beat it. And this is only possible if we, if somehow we are signaled that we lack the incompetence, we lack the competence for fighting against those type of waswasa. It is the negative feedback that makes us, you know, pursue towards a direction which would make us more knowledgeable believers.
MashaAllah. Salih. Alhamdulillah, we talked aspects, and I myself, mashallah, benefited. May Allah, inshallah, allow us to waswasa for our benefits. Well, Nojam, maybe can you make dua, inshallah, before we finish?
I pray, oh Allah, allow us to be always vigilant, allow us to add to our knowledge infrastructure, to add to our trust in you, and to make a distinction between positive and negative when it comes to waswasa, inshallah.
So this is the end of, inshallah, the waswasa panel. inshallah next week. Inshallah, jazakallah.
Do we know what we're doing next week? Do we know what the subject will be?
We'll talk in the group, inshallah, and then
Inshallah. Inshallah. Okay. Thank you very much. It was good to hear everyone after the break we had. Alhamdulillah.
Okay. Jazakallah.
Jazakallah.
Assalamu alaikum.